If we don't have anything, that's good. Hi again, everybody. So we kind of had a last-minute change of tack from my point of view. I kind of thought about 4 or 5 things that I might have wanted to talk to you about. But I think we've covered loads of the things that we've done, and I've stuck my head up above the parapet a few too many times, I think, there, and given it all away. So I thought what I'd talk to you about is our high-performance CPR implementation journey and what it actually means for the people in green and how we got them to buy into the concept. So we took the view that it's just more than just a cardiac arrest protocol. And writing it down on a bit of paper and putting it into a guideline and giving it to the college and the educators and saying, there you go, make it happen, was probably a little bit too naive. So when Paul Bailey, our clinical services director, sat me down in his office when I was new in this post, he kind of said, where do you think we should start? And the words that came out of my mouth were as much a surprise to me as they were to him. And I said, hearts and minds. And I kind of thought, where did that come from? But it was kind of true. And we needed to start working on the paramedic populace and the clinicians and start fostering that buy-in long before we knew what a high-performance model was going to look like for us and what we were going to do in that space. So as I talk to you for the next few minutes, I'll be talking mainly and referring about the paramedic model, but it's important to kind of acknowledge that we do have a very, very vast volunteer base who are as important to our community as our paramedics. And I think what we did links really closely with Step 10 and fostering that culture of excellence. And when Dr. Kudenchuk stood up here and talked about it, I thought these are the kind of things we thought about. And it's good to know that we had the right track in mind. So Step 3, when they talk about it in the 10 steps, talks about the metrics of CPR. So we needed to start selling that. And we started to think, well, let's anticipate the resistance. What are we going to hear? What are we going to get? But we need to sell the metrics. And just like Dr. Kudenchuk said, we opened up some dialogue and some channels. And we used just basic tools like a Facebook clinical governance page that a lot of our staff subscribe to as a closed group. And Paul Bailey is very, very active on there. And the staff kind of feel that they've got this one-on-one communication channel with not only the CG team and the clinical services team, but also to the boss. And the dialogue that goes on there is actually quite good. And what it does is it allows us to give our message in a good fashion, but it also allows us to measure and gauge how much expertise and how many clever people we actually do employ. So we had that. We also have a newsletter, a clinical newsletter, and we started to fill that with links to certain literatures and YouTube videos, and your infamous 15-minute Science of CPR video made it onto that list. And we just started talking about it. We gave our area managers and our clinical support paramedics all of this information and said, when you're out there with the staff, shepherd them to these resources. Talk about high-performance concepts. Encourage them to go and Google it and read it. And we started to get some kind of buy-in and interest, and it generated a conversation. We talked to them also a little bit about what it might look like in those meaningful gains. And in informal talks and development evenings, Paul Bailey would maybe sit and talk about Dave Brailsford's experiences with Team Sky Racing and how he took meaningful gains in a cycling team and turned them into gold medals. And he also does an interesting one about Breaking Bad, and for the Breaking Bad fans, he brings in the characters and talks about the perfect recipe, and how people will come to your product. So it was those simple messaging concepts that we took, and we thought a little bit about the human factors and the human behaviors and what drives our staff to resist, and we thought about those kind of change management models of Lewin and Cotter and people like that. So we went a different step, and we engaged a human factors guy, and not too dissimilar from Martin Bromley in the UK, who's the clinical human factors type of guru. We have somebody in Western Australia called Tony Locke, who's a ex-Air Force and a Virgin Australia pilot and a CRM advocate. And we asked him to come and give us some advice about how do we instigate the change and what should we do. And he gave us some really good advice from that point of view. We selected a good cross-section of paramedics, a healthy balance of naysayers, a healthy balance of what we call a solid crew, the dependable guys who will follow. We made sure we had a good gender balance within the group, and we also included the educators. And we got them all together and said, help us design the high-performance model. This is what we want to achieve, but we need the people to buy in, and you do it every day. And we sit at our desks, and we know what it should look like on paper. What will it look like in reality? And that's it. So we just kind of changed the objective and said, it's ROSC at all costs. No matter what the patient presents in, our aim is to get ROSC. Because quite often we get the objective of the resus is, well, we're just going to do 20 minutes, call it. So it's about changing the mindset. And so off we went, we got the people together, we designed a high-performance model, and we started to evolve it in the classroom. And we kind of looked at it and went, where can we get the gains? What do we need to lose? And it started to feel a bit more real. We played with airway management approaches, we played with when to shock safety, and we kind of got a good feel for it. And then we brought Tony Locke back again, and we said, tell us what the non-technical parts look like. How does it look? What does it feel like? What can you see as a non-clinician that we need to change? And he gave us some really good insights into functional language, the tactile hand taps that you guys saw on the video. That came from him as he talked about hearing, hearing being dissipating during those stressful situations, and how people flowed around the patient, and some really good insights into all of that. So we thought that was pretty valuable, and that spilled over into the volunteer model when we designed that, and we made sure it was really as close as possible to the paramedic model, because we have a lot of hybrid in the coastal towns where volunteers are working with paramedics. So we needed it to be as like for like as possible. And then we thought about the training and education. There was the challenge, because it couldn't be business as usual. And we thought, well, we need to get the right trainers. The trainers need to be completely bought into the concept. They need to understand the why, and they need to be able to defend the hard questions. So the FAQs were formulated. What are the questions we're going to get from the embedded and the entrenched resistors, and what are the answers? And again, we thought that was a good strategy. The other thing that we also quite rightly or wrongly do is we assess individual competencies. And that's really important in any clinical setting. But rarely do we assess the team. And here we are saying, we want you guys to go as 4 or 5 people as a team and perform to the best of your abilities. But when you come into the classroom, we look at what individuals are doing, but we don't assess the team performance. So it's not business as usual. We want to know how well you do, but we also want to know how well your colleagues do. So a bit of a mind shift in that space as well, which is quite different, because we need buy-in from the decision makers in the college. So we eventually settled on the product, and we have a continuing education program every year for 800 paramedics that come in, and they all come to Perth for training. We're about 200 in, and so far so good. We're doing pretty well, and we haven't had any unanticipated backlash, and we're quite happy with that. So it's either going to be a very big gotcha moment, or we've done something well. We're starting to see some trends in survival increase, and we don't know why that is, whether it's just from having talked about it for a year, or whether those 200, as they've come through the college, have started to live it, and by default bringing their non-trained colleagues along for the ride. but that's pretty good. And of course, everybody comes to Perth, so we need that to be managed appropriately as well. And so the rostering department is critical to the success, because traditionally they will just pick people from a list and in they come, because they've also got a deployment responsibility. But we've asked them really to consider where these people are coming from, because we need the paramedics coming through, we call it CEP, we need them to be trained at the same time as the colleagues that they're working closely with in the regions and crewmates to also be trained, because otherwise we're going to lose people. So rostering had to change the way they think about how they bring people in. And credit to them, they've been as facilitating and accommodating as possible. So that's really good. The challenge for them lies in the country towns, because the paramedics that work in the hybrid models will come to Perth, but they'll be working with volunteers that might not have been trained. So the volunteer educators are a separate arm. So they need to know that a certain town or a region is starting to be converted. That's where they need to go in and do the volunteer training. So that's pretty good. Crucially, when they come into CEP, we give them the why. We tell them why. And we quote all sorts of things. We quote some of the literature and the evidence and the figures. We talk to them about the metrics of CPR. We measure them on a mannequin for 2 minutes. And we kind of set the challenge to them that having traditionally assessed CPR with a Mark 1 eyeball is probably not as efficient as it should be. And we've got this technology. And for people, it's the first time they've ever had their CPR measured. And it's quite insightful into their own performance characteristics. And it gives them some kind of an idea of where they need to go. So now that we're a quarter of the way through, and we seem to think we're in cruise with this, we've started to now think about the ongoing QI. And what do we do in 3 months, 6 months, and a year? And that's a challenge for us. So we've got a business case to put forward, because again, that can't be business as usual. Paramedics are usually coming annually for updates, and we don't think that's right. So we took some lessons from Arizona, and they kind of said to us that they did something similar, and they went back to their paramedics a year later, and they realized they should have gone back 3 months later. And so we thought that that was a pretty good lesson to learn from someone else, and we'll do that. And we know that probably the money shot in that is to have mobile symbulances or what have you, and take the ongoing QI to the people. We can't bring people back to Perth. So in summary, really, it's just more about, it's not as much a protocol as it is about changing hearts and minds. It's about creating that appetite for improvement. It links with steps 10, the QI, and with steps 8, the QI and continued improvement, and number 10, the culture of excellence. And that's what we kind of sell it to them as. It's a relentless pursuit of excellence. Thanks.